At 5:42 on a Friday morning, 40 hospitals across 4 states picked up their phones at almost the same time. Every one of them called the same warehouse, every one of them asked the same question, and every one of them wanted to speak to a man who just 8 hours earlier had been fired, walked out through a side door by security, and told he would never work in the medical supply industry again. His name was Lucas Grant. He was 39 years old, a single father, a night shift receiver at a pharmaceutical distribution center, and by sunrise that morning, 40 hospitals were calling his name because a single phone call he had made the night before, a call that lasted exactly 3 minutes and 37 seconds, had just frozen an entire company. The woman on duty at the operations desk was a supervisor named Denise. She had been halfway through her final rounds when the first call came in. She picked up, expecting a delivery delay. Instead, the voice on the other end belonged to the supply director at St. Catherine Regional Medical Center, and the first thing he said was not about a truck or a schedule. He asked a question that made Denise pause with the receiver against her ear. "Who is Lucas Grant?" She did not have an answer ready. Before she could form one, another line began to ring. This time, it was Mercy General Hospital. The caller asked the same question, only with more urgency in the voice. 3 minutes later, a third hospital called, then a fourth. By 6 o'clock, the calls were coming in so quickly that Denise had stopped trying to log them one by one. She simply wrote the hospital names down the side of a printed schedule, and by 6:10, she had counted 40 of them. 40 hospitals, all calling before sunrise, all asking the same thing. They wanted to know who had stopped the shipment. They wanted to know who had flagged lot number CVX 4417 of a cardiac medication called Cardiovexil, and every single one of them ended the call with the same request. They wanted to speak with Lucas Grant. Warren Pike walked into the operations room just after that. His suit was crisp, his tie already knotted, but there was something tight in the corners of his mouth that Denise had not seen before. He stood behind her chair and read the list of hospital names growing down the margin of the schedule. He told her to stop taking the calls. He told her to route them to corporate communications and to say nothing else. Denise turned in her chair and looked up at him. "We can't route them," she said. "These calls are coming in on the Founders Emergency Channel. It bypasses corporate. It goes straight to the Safety Committee." Warren's expression did not change, but his hand tightened on the back of her chair. He asked her very carefully who had activated that channel. Denise looked at her monitor, then up at him again. The name was already there, logged and time-stamped, and she read it out loud because there was no reason not to. Lucas Grant. Warren's face went still in a way that felt colder than anger. He said in a low, even voice that Lucas Grant no longer worked for the company. He said the name as if pronouncing it out loud would make it less true. Denise looked back at her monitor, then up at him again. "The hospitals seem to know," she said. "That's why they're calling." At that exact moment, on the other side of town, Lucas Grant was sitting in the driver's seat of a 15-year-old sedan parked across the street from Sophie's elementary school. His termination letter was folded once and pushed deep into the inner pocket of his jacket. Underneath the jacket, he was still wearing the navy blue warehouse shirt from the shift he had been walked out of the night before. He had not been home yet. He had not slept. His phone lay face down on the passenger seat, and he did not reach for it because he was waiting for his daughter's parent meeting to begin, and he did not want anything to change the look on his face when she saw him walk through the door. His right hand rested on his chest over the pocket where he kept a folded piece of paper his daughter had drawn for him the day before, a crayon truck, and above it 4 words in careful 9-year-old handwriting: "Bring everyone home safe." He did not know that 40 hospitals were calling his name. The call he had made the night before had lasted exactly 3 minutes and 37 seconds. During that call, he had not asked for his job back. He had not asked for an apology. He had not asked for an investigation into the man who had fired him. He had asked for only one thing, spoken plainly into the phone the way a man asks for a glass of water when he is very tired. He had asked to stop the trucks. The night before, in a small conference room next to the cold storage bay, Warren Pike had leaned across a table and told Lucas that no hospital in the network knew his name. He had said it the way a man says a thing he believes cannot be argued with. He had said it to end the conversation and to end the man sitting across from him. By sunrise, every one of those hospitals was calling for Lucas Grant by name.
To understand why 40 hospitals were asking for Lucas Grant that Friday morning, you have to go back 72 hours to a Tuesday that began the way most of his days began, with the smell of eggs on a stove and a 9-year-old girl still in her pajamas asking whether she could have juice for breakfast. Lucas had come off his overnight shift at 6 p.m. He had driven home in the same navy blue warehouse shirt he always wore, and he had walked through the front door of his small rented house exactly as Sophie was climbing down from her bed. He made her breakfast before he made his own. He always did. He listened to her talk about a school play she had a small part in, and he nodded in all the right places, and then he slept for 4 hours on the couch with his work boots still on, because he did not want to miss her afternoon rehearsal at the elementary school. He was in the audience when she performed. He sat 3 rows back, still wearing the warehouse shirt underneath his jacket because he had not had time to change. Sophie spotted him from the stage. She smiled the way children smile when they are pretending not to be excited. After the rehearsal, she ran to him with a folded piece of paper in her hand and told him not to open it until he got to work that night. He promised. He tucked it into the chest pocket of his work shirt without looking, and he kept his promise all the way through dinner and all the way to the front door of the distribution center. Before dinner, though, something small happened that he would remember for the rest of his life. Sophie had a mild cold. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a small orange box of children's cold medicine in her hand, reading the label the way she read everything, slowly, out loud, one word at a time. She turned the box over, looked up at her father, and asked him a question. "Dad, how do sick people know it's real medicine inside?" Lucas paused at the sink. He dried his hands on a towel before he answered. He told her that they trusted the people who had checked it. He said it simply, the way he said most things to her, without a lecture attached. Sophie thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded and told him very seriously that he had to check carefully then. Lucas smiled and said he would. He did not know yet that in 6 hours he would be standing in front of 8 pallets of a cardiac medication, and his daughter's small plain sentence would be the reason he refused to walk away. He arrived at the warehouse just before 10 o'clock that night. He clocked in. He pulled the folded piece of paper from his chest pocket and read it under the fluorescent light of the receiving bay. A crayon truck, 4 words above it. Bring everyone home safe. He folded it again and put it back where he could feel it against his chest, and then he began his shift. At 11:18 that night, the delivery truck from Meridian Biologics pulled into the loading dock. 8 pallets, Cardiovex L, a cardiac medication used in emergency heart care. Total value, $2.4 million. Lucas walked out to meet the driver, clipboard in one hand, scanner in the other, and he began the intake the way he always did, 1 pallet at a time. The central system pinged green on the first scan. Approved vendor, authentication complete. That should have been the end of the check for most receivers, but Lucas Grant was the man his coworkers quietly called the double scanner, and he did not stop at the first green light. He knelt down next to the first pallet, and he looked at the boxes the way a man looks at something he had held 10,000 times before. The ink on the lot number was too dark. That was the first thing he noticed. On genuine Cardiovex L packaging, the lot number was printed in a specific matte gray. These lot numbers were almost black, slightly raised as if they had been printed on top of the original. The heat seal on the outer wrap was welded in the wrong place, off by a 1/4 inch. And when he checked 3 separate boxes on 3 separate pallets, he found the same serial number printed on all 3. He stood up. He walked to the supply cabinet, pulled out a red quarantine label, wrote the lot number by hand, and pressed it firmly onto the shrink wrap of the lead pallet. The label read in block letters, "Quarantine, do not release." He was still standing next to the pallet when the door at the far end of the receiving bay opened and Warren Pike walked in. Warren almost never came down to the floor at night. He was carrying a tablet, and his face was already set the way a man's face is when he has come to end a conversation before it begins. Warren stopped in front of the pallet. He looked at the label. He looked at Lucas. And then, without saying a word, he reached out, took the corner of the label between his thumb and forefinger, and tore it off the pallet.
The red label came off the pallet in one clean motion, and for a long moment neither man said anything. Warren held the torn paper between his fingers as if it were an insect he had pulled off a wall, and Lucas stood very still because he had worked at this company for 6 years, and he had never seen a manager remove a quarantine label with his own hands. Warren spoke first. He said the shipment had to leave the warehouse before 4 in the morning. He said the hospitals were waiting. He said Lucas was being paid to move product, not to think for doctors. He said it the way a man says something he has said to other people before. And Lucas listened without interrupting, the way he had learned to listen in the Navy, letting the other man finish so that the silence afterward would carry more weight than any argument. When Warren was done, Lucas answered him quietly. He said he was being paid to make sure that what they moved was actually medicine. He said the lot numbers were wrong. He said the seals were wrong. He said 3 boxes on 3 separate pallets carried the same serial number. And he said the manufacturer authentication had failed twice on the retired scanner and once on the current one. He said all of this in the flat, even voice of a man reading from a checklist, because he had learned a long time ago that facts sounded stronger when they were not shouted. Warren did not answer him directly. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called Evelyn Cross, the regional vice president of the supply chain, and told her to come down to the receiving bay. 10 minutes later, Evelyn walked in, wearing a coat over what looked like pajamas, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired. She had been at the company for 13 years. She had started as a coordinator. She was, by every measure that mattered on paper, the second most senior person in the room. She listened to Warren, then she listened to Lucas, then she looked at the pallets herself, and Lucas watched her face, and he saw the exact moment she noticed the mismatched serial numbers. He saw her jaw tighten. He saw her ask Warren quietly why Meridian Biologics had been exempted from enhanced inspection 3 shipments in a row. Warren answered her with numbers, late delivery penalties, contract fines, cold storage costs, quarterly targets. He did not answer where the medicine had actually come from. Evelyn stepped closer to Lucas and lowered her voice. She told him to sign the release. She told him they would recheck the shipment in the morning. She said it the way a person says a thing they do not fully believe, and Lucas felt her fear more than he heard her words. His right hand moved to the chest pocket of his work shirt. He touched the folded piece of paper his daughter had put there that afternoon. He looked at Evelyn, and then he looked at the release form on Warren's tablet, and then he said the sentence that would end his career at the company that night. By morning, he said, someone may have already taken it. Warren did not answer him. He turned the tablet toward Evelyn instead. And here the story briefly steps away from the receiving bay, because to understand what Warren did next, you have to understand what he had already been doing for 11 months. Meridian Biologics had been founded 6 weeks before it received its first contract from Vantage Care. Its listed owner was a man named Derek Pike, who was Warren's first cousin. In 11 months, Meridian had received $6.8 million from Vantage Care. Warren had received a share of that money routed through a shell company called Pike Strategic Consulting, in payments small enough to look like ordinary consulting fees. 17 times over those 11 months, an authentication warning had been overridden in the Vantage Care system, and every one of those overrides had come from Warren's account. 4 warehouse employees asked questions about Meridian's shipments. All 4 had been written up, had their hours cut, or had been quietly pushed out of the company within a month of asking. Lucas did not know any of this yet. He did not know about Derek. He did not know about the shell company. He did not know about the 4 other employees. All he knew was that the boxes in front of him did not match the manufacturer's records, and the man standing across from him did not want to hear it. Warren went back to his office. He sat down at his desk. He opened the human resources system on his computer, and he began to build a file on Lucas Grant. He created a report about a late delivery Lucas had never been assigned. He created a report about a broken seal on a pallet that never existed. He created a report about the unauthorized use of a retired scanner, which was true, except that the scanner had been sitting on the same wall rack for 6 years, and every night receiver had used it during that time. He entered 2 witness statements from employees who had not been on the floor that night, and on one of the reports, without noticing, he entered a date that fell on an evening when Lucas was in the emergency room with Sophie for a high fever, a fact documented in 3 hospital records and 1 insurance claim. The narrator's voice steps in here because this is the sentence that explains the entire fraud. Warren did not need every record to be perfect. He only needed them to look official enough for someone who was afraid of him to sign. He printed the termination packet. He walked it down the hall to Evelyn Cross's office and set it on her desk. She looked at the top page. She saw the wrong date. She saw the name of a witness who had been on vacation.
She saw the signature line waiting for her pen. She did not pick up the pen right away, but she did not push the packet away either. Evelyn Cross did pick up the pen eventually. She picked it up the way a person picks up something heavier than it looks, and she signed her name on the line Warren had left for her. And by 10 o'clock on Thursday night, Lucas Grant was called into the small conference room next to the cold storage bay for what the packet on the table called a formal separation meeting. The room was cold. It always was, because it shared a wall with the refrigerated storage, and the air handlers ran on a different circuit. Warren sat at the head of the table. Evelyn sat to his right, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes on the packet. Lucas sat across from them in the same navy blue warehouse shirt he had worn to Sophie's rehearsal that afternoon, and he listened while Warren read the list of violations out loud. Late delivery, broken seal, unauthorized use of retired equipment, 2 witness statements, a final report about the events of that evening in which Lucas had refused a direct instruction from a regional director. Lucas listened all the way through. Then he asked Warren to turn the packet toward him. Warren did. Lucas read the first page slowly, the way he read everything else, and when he reached the second page, he stopped and put his finger on a single line of text. He looked up at Warren. He said, very quietly, that on the date listed on that report, he had not been at the warehouse. He had been in the emergency room with his daughter, who had spiked a fever of 104. He said he had the hospital paperwork at home. He said he could bring it in the morning. Warren answered him without looking down. He said Lucas could file an appeal through the proper channels. He said the decision was already made. He said his access to the building, to the systems, and to the loading dock had been revoked as of that moment. Lucas looked at Evelyn. She did not look back. Warren leaned forward across the table then, and he said the sentence that he did not know he was going to regret for the rest of his life. He said that no hospital in the network knew Lucas Grant's name. He said the hospitals needed trucks on time. He said they did not need opinions from a man holding a scanner. He said it slowly, the way a man says something he has been waiting all evening to say. And he said it because he wanted to end not just the meeting, but the man sitting across from him. Lucas did not argue with him. He did not raise his voice. He only asked one question. He asked whether the shipment had been released. Warren answered that it was no longer any of his concern. Lucas stood up. He walked to the locker room. He opened locker number 42, and he took out 3 things: a photograph of Sophie in a school play costume, a challenge coin from his old Navy unit, and, folded behind the photograph, the employee badge his late wife Rachel had worn in the same building years before, when she had been the director of patient safety programs. He put all 3 into the inner pocket of his jacket. He left the retired scanner, unit number 17, on the shelf where he had always kept it, because he no longer had permission to touch it. 2 security guards walked him to the side door. They were polite. One of them, a man named Marcus, had known Lucas for 4 years. Marcus did not speak on the way out, but at the door he put a hand briefly on Lucas's shoulder, and Lucas nodded to him, and neither man said anything else. Lucas sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time before he started the engine. He looked at his phone.
There was a message from Sophie. She had typed it before bed. It said, "Do not forget my class in the morning. I will save you a seat." He read it twice. He read it a third time. Then he looked down at the termination letter folded on the passenger seat, which said his employment was ended effective immediately. And he sat there for a full minute, holding both things in his mind at once. A system had just told him he no longer had a place in it. His daughter was still saving him a seat. He picked up the phone. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he had not called in almost 4 years. Agnes Cole, his late wife's family attorney, the woman who helped Rachel draft on the last months of her life a document called the Patient Safety Stewardship Clause. Agnes answered on the second ring. She had known his voice for a long time, and she did not ask why he was calling at that hour. She only listened while he told her in short sentences what had happened in the warehouse that night. Then she asked him 3 questions. She asked whether the shipment had been released. Lucas said yes. She asked whether they had fired the man who had tried to stop it. Lucas said yes. She asked whether he wanted to activate Rachel's clause. Lucas looked at the photograph of Sophie in his pocket. He looked at the piece of paper his daughter had drawn for him, still folded against his chest. He thought about the 8 pallets he had not been able to hold in place, and about the 40 hospitals somewhere down the line of that shipment, and about the patients he would never meet. He said the sentence that Agnes had been waiting almost 4 years to hear. "I want them to stop the trucks." The call lasted exactly 3 minutes and 37 seconds, and in the moment Lucas ended it, on the other side of the county, a set of protocols that Rachel Grant had written into the founding shareholder documents of Vantage Care began to execute in the order she had designed.
40 hospitals received an emergency safety notice on the Founders Channel. A full backup of the warehouse data was taken before any account could touch it. Warren Pike's override permissions were quietly locked. 2 trucks carrying lot number CVX 4417 were stopped by dispatch before they reached their unloading bays. And in a small office at the far end of the corporate building, a light on the desk of Dr. Helen Ward, the chair of the Patient Safety Committee, began to blink for almost 4 years. Warren Pike did not know any of this. He was still sitting in his office at the warehouse, drafting an internal email to his team, telling them that Lucas Grant would never work in the medical supply industry again. While Warren Pike was drafting that email in his office, believing he had ended Lucas Grant's career, 2 other people inside the same building were about to make decisions that would end his own instead. The first was a data preservation specialist named Priya Shah. She was 33 years old, 5 years at the company, and she was the person Warren called at 7 the next morning to tell her in a voice that did not invite questions that the retired scanner unit number 17 had produced faulty readings during Lucas Grant's final shift, and that the scan history from that device needed to be purged from the system before end of day. Priya said yes on the phone. Then she hung up and did not do what he had asked. Instead, she opened the metadata layer of the warehouse database, the layer most managers did not know existed, and she began to read. What she found there took her almost 2 hours to process. 17 authentication overrides on Meridian shipments in the past 11 months, every one of them logged under Warren Pike's account credentials. 3 disciplinary reports filed against Lucas Grant, all created within a 4-hour window on Thursday afternoon, all backdated. Dates on 2 of those reports that did not match his time card. And on the retired scanner unit 17, an unsynced local cache that still held the original authentication failure from Tuesday night, untouched, exactly as Lucas had recorded it. Priya sat at her desk for a long time. She thought about her parents' mortgage, which she helped pay every month. She thought about a former coworker of hers who had reported a safety issue 2 years ago and had not been able to find work in the industry since. She thought about Warren and about the way he spoke to people whose names he decided did not matter. She copied the metadata onto an encrypted drive. Then she wrote an email to Evelyn Cross. Then she deleted it. She printed the report instead, walked halfway down the hall to Evelyn's office, stood outside the door for almost a minute, and then walked back to her desk without knocking. She tried again the next morning. This time she did not stop at the door. She walked in and set the printed report on Evelyn's desk, and she stood there while Evelyn read the first page. Evelyn looked up at her. She asked her quietly why she had not brought it earlier. Priya answered her honestly. She said she had not known whether Evelyn was protecting the staff or protecting the man who signed her paychecks. Evelyn did not answer that. She looked down at the report again. Priya waited a moment longer. Then she said the sentence that would change the direction of the entire investigation. "I do not need to know if you are brave," Priya said. "I only need to know what you are going to do after you have seen this." Evelyn closed the folder. She sat very still for almost a full minute. Then she picked up her desk phone and dialed the outside law firm that represented the board of directors, not the internal general counsel who reported to Warren. She knew that this call would probably end her career at the company. She made it anyway. While Evelyn was on the phone, one floor below, Warren Pike was walking into a meeting with his direct reports. He was calm. He was, in his own mind, ahead of the problem. He told his team that Lucas Grant had been separated for cause the night before, that the paperwork was clean, and that anyone from any hospital calling after him were to be redirected to corporate communications with no further comment. He said at the end of the meeting that Lucas Grant would never work in the medical supply industry again. At almost the same moment, on the operations floor, Denise, the overnight supervisor, was answering the 14th hospital call of the morning. The voice on the other end asked to be connected to Lucas Grant. Another line rang, and the caller said, "Please, we would like to thank the man who stopped the shipment." A third line rang, and the voice said, "Our cardiac unit was scheduled to open that lot this morning. We need to speak to whoever caught it." Warren finished his meeting. He walked back to his office. He opened his email. There was a single new message near the top of his inbox, from the office of Dr. Helen Ward, chair of the Patient Safety Committee. It was an invitation to the full board of directors on Monday morning at 9 a.m. The subject line said only, "Urgent matter, mandatory attendance." Warren read it twice. He was not worried. He believed he had been called to explain the actions of a disgruntled former employee. He believed he would walk into that room, deliver the version of events he had already rehearsed, and walk out with his position intact. He did not know that Priya Shah had already handed over the metadata. He did not know that Evelyn Cross had already spoken to the outside attorneys. He did not know that Lucas Grant had been asked quietly to attend the same meeting. He closed the email. He told his assistant to clear his Monday morning, and he went back to work as if nothing in his world had changed.
Monday morning arrived exactly the way Warren Pike had expected it, and exactly the way he had not. He put on his best suit. He drove to the corporate tower downtown. He rode the elevator to the top floor believing he was about to spend 40 minutes explaining a personnel matter to a room of executives who did not want to be bothered with warehouse details. He walked into the boardroom at 8:57, 3 minutes early, the way he always did. The room was already full. 9 members of the board of directors sat around the long table. Dr. Helen Ward sat at the head. Agnes Cole, the family attorney, sat on her right. An outside counsel sat next to him. A representative from the Federal Regulatory Agency sat next to him. Evelyn Cross was seated further down, her hands folded on the table. Priya Shah sat beside her, a small stack of printed reports in front of her. 4 boxes of documents were stacked against the wall. The retired scanner unit, number 17, sat inside a clear evidence bag on the table. Beside it were 2 boxes of cardiovexil, one authentic, one counterfeit. And spread across the far end of the table was a printed list of 40 hospital names. Warren stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved across the table. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Priya. He looked at the boxes.
His first instinct, the one he had always relied on, was to find someone in the room to blame before anyone in the room could blame him. He was still gathering that instinct when the door behind him opened again and Lucas Grant walked in. Lucas was wearing a dark blue blazer. Underneath it, visible at the collar, was the same navy warehouse shirt he had worn to Sophie's rehearsal, the same shirt he had been walked out of the building in, the same shirt he had been sitting in when he made a 3-minute and 37-second phone call from a car outside an elementary school. He walked past Warren without looking at him. He sat down in the empty chair to the left of Dr. Helen Ward. Dr. Ward waited until the room was quiet. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the calm authority of a woman who had spent 40 years in operating rooms. "Lucas Grant is not present in this meeting as a former employee," she said. "He is present as the steward of the founding shareholders' Patient Safety Authority." Warren opened his mouth. He said Lucas had never disclosed that role. Agnes Cole answered him without raising her voice. She said the clause did not require disclosure. She said it only required that the steward not use the authority for personal gain, and that the record of the past 72 hours would speak for itself on that point. Warren tried a different approach. He turned toward Evelyn and said that she was the one who had signed the release order on Wednesday night. He said the responsibility for the shipment leaving the warehouse rested on her signature, not on his instructions. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face the board. "Yes," she said, "I signed it. I signed it because I was afraid of losing my position. Lucas refused to sign it because he was afraid a patient might lose their life. That is the difference between us." She paused. She looked down at her hands and then back up. "I take full responsibility for my signature," she said, "but Mr. Pike modified authentication data and fabricated personnel reports to remove the man who caught the problem. Those are not the same offense." Priya then spoke. She walked the board through the metadata layer of the warehouse database. She showed them the timestamps of 17 authentication overrides, each one tied to Warren's account credentials. She showed them the 4-hour window in which 3 disciplinary reports had been generated against Lucas and the backdated entries on 2 of them. She placed the retired scanner unit number 17 on the table, and she explained that its unsynced local cache still held the original authentication failure from Tuesday night, exactly as Lucas had recorded it. Warren said the device was faulty. He said half a second too quickly. Lucas stood up. He walked around the table to where the 2 boxes of Cardiovexil were placed. He picked up one in each hand. He held them side by side, and without raising his voice, he pointed out 3 differences to the board: the color of the lot number ink, the position of the heat seal on the outer wrap, the serial number, which on 3 sample boxes from the shipment had been duplicated across pallets. Then he set both boxes down, looked across the table at Warren, and asked him a single question. "Do you know which patient was going to receive this box?" Warren did not answer. Lucas did not wait long. He spoke again, and his voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it. "Thursday night," he said, "you told me that no hospital knew my name. Friday morning, they did not call because of who I am. They called because of what you sent them." The outside counsel began the financial presentation then. $6.8 million in payments from Vantage Care to Meridian Biologicals over 11 months. A parallel stream of consulting fees from a shell entity called Pike Strategic Consulting into Warren's personal accounts. Email correspondence between Warren and his cousin Derek discussing the pricing of substituted product. A direct written instruction dated Friday morning telling Priya Shah to purge the scanner data. And from the warehouse security camera at 11:41 on Tuesday night, a clear image of Warren Pike's own hand tearing a red quarantine label off a pallet of medication. By the time the presentation ended, Warren was no longer sitting upright in his chair. Dr. Ward looked at the room. She looked at Warren.
She spoke one sentence. "Your operational authority is suspended, effective immediately." 2 members of the corporate security team stepped forward and took position behind Warren's chair.
The two security officers did not touch him. They only stood behind his chair and waited. And when Warren Pike finally stood up, the walkout of that boardroom mirrored, almost step for step, the walk Lucas Grant had taken out of the receiving bay 4 nights earlier. The same side door, the same silence, the same badge revoked before the man reached the parking lot. The difference was that this time, no one in the building was pretending it had been a routine separation. The federal investigation opened before the end of the day. Warren was named on 6 counts, including wire fraud, distribution of adulterated pharmaceuticals, falsification of records, obstruction of an internal audit, retaliation against a protected reporter, and fabrication of personnel documents. His cousin, Derek Pike, listed owner of Meridian Biologics, agreed within 48 hours to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, and the paper trail he handed over closed every remaining gap in the case. Back in the boardroom, once the door had shut behind Warren, Dr. Helen Ward turned to Lucas and offered him something the board had already discussed privately that weekend. They asked him to serve as interim chief executive of the regional operation while the company stabilized. Lucas did not answer right away. He looked down at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at Dr. Ward and he shook his head. "I do not need Warren's office," he said. "I need a system where the next person who says stop does not have to lose their job to be heard." He then laid out 4 conditions. He spoke them the way he had spoken everything else in the past week, plainly, without emphasis, one after another. The first was that every warehouse worker, every driver, and every pharmacist on the receiving end of a shipment would have the authority to place a lot into quarantine, and that no single manager, regardless of title, would have the unilateral power to lift that quarantine. The second was that the data layer of the warehouse system would be rebuilt so that no individual account could override an authentication result. Every change would require 2 levels of approval, and every action would be logged in an immutable record. The third was that any employee at any level would have a direct reporting channel to the Patient Safety Committee, bypassing regional management entirely. The fourth was restitution. The 4 employees Warren had pushed out for asking questions would be reinstated with back pay. Hours cut in retaliation would be restored. Health coverage lost during the terminations would be reinstated retroactively, and the 40 hospitals that had received alerts on Friday morning would not be charged a single dollar for the replacement medication that Advantage Care would ship at its own expense. The board agreed to all 4 conditions before the meeting adjourned. Lucas then did something no one in the room had expected. He turned toward the board and admitted that he suspected the system was compromised months before the Tuesday night shipment. He said he believed wrongly that if he did every step of his own job correctly, the system would eventually correct itself. He said he had waited too long. He said other people had been hurt while he waited. He said the founding clause was written as a last resort, but a last resort used late was still a last resort used late. He did not make himself the hero of that sentence. He made himself accountable for the delay. Evelyn Cross was not promoted. The board decided, and she accepted, that she would remain in her current role under supervision, and that she would personally lead the restitution program for the 4 employees who had been pushed out. Before the end of the week, she stood in front of every worker in the Eastern Regional Network on a video call, and she named the specific fear that had led her to sign the release order on Wednesday night. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only told them what she had done and what she was doing now to undo it. Priya Shah was named Director of Supply Chain Data Integrity. Her first project was to design the immutable logging system Lucas had asked for, the one that no future Warren Pike would be able to quietly override. Lucas himself accepted a new title, one that had not existed in the company before. He became Chief Patient Safety Steward. He reported directly to the board, not to operations, and his authority sat parallel to the executive line rather than beneath it. He kept the same Navy warehouse shirt in his closet. He wore it under his blazer on the days he visited the receiving bays because he wanted the workers there to see it. At the end of that Monday, after the room had cleared, Thomas Vail, daughter's father and founder of the company, walked into the boardroom for the first time in almost 2 years. He was 70 years old. He moved slowly. He sat down across from Lucas and looked at him for a long moment before he spoke. "Did Rachel know," he asked, "that you would activate the clause?" Lucas took a moment before he answered. "She built it," he said, "because she knew there might come a day when no one else would stop." Thomas Vail nodded once. He did not say anything else. He reached across the table and set his hand briefly on the folder the older man had just touched, and then he stood up and left the room. Thomas Vail left the boardroom in silence, and for a long while Lucas sat alone at the table with his hand resting on the folder the older man had just touched. He did not open it.
He did not need to. Everything inside it had already been decided. What he was carrying home that evening was not paperwork. It was a promise made almost 4 years earlier to a woman who was no longer alive that he had finally kept. A month later, on a Saturday morning that smelled like early autumn, Lucas took Sophie with him to the distribution center for the first time since the night he had been walked out of it. There was no shift running. The receiving bays were quiet. The parking lot was almost empty. He wore his blue blazer with the warehouse shirt underneath, and Sophie wore a small backpack with a notebook inside because she had told him very seriously that she wanted to draw the trucks. He walked her through the side door he had been escorted out of on Thursday night. He did not scan his badge because his new badge did not require it, but he still carried the old one in his pocket. He kept it there the way some people keep old photographs, as a reminder rather than a tool. He led Sophie past the receiving bay and down a short hallway to a room that had not existed a month earlier. The sign above the door read, "Rachel Vail Grant Patient Safety Center." Sophie stopped when she saw the name. She looked up at her father. She did not say anything. She only reached for his hand and held it while they walked inside. The room was small, but every wall carried something. On the wall to the left, framed behind glass, was the red quarantine label Warren Pike had torn off the pallet at 11:41 on Tuesday night. Beside it, in a second case, sat the retired scanner unit number 17, its screen dark, its handle worn smooth from 6 years of a single receiver's grip. And on the far wall, printed larger than everything else, was a map of the eastern United States with 40 red dots on it, one for each hospital that called the warehouse the morning after the shipment was stopped. Sophie walked to the map first. She stood in front of it for almost a full minute, tracing the dots with her eyes. Then she turned to Lucas. "Dad," she said, "all these places called looking for you?" Lucas knelt down beside her so that his eyes were level with hers. "They called," he said, "looking for the man who stopped the shipment." Sophie thought about that for a moment. She looked back at the map. Then she looked at her father again. "But that was you," she said. Lucas did not answer her right away. He looked at the map with her. He thought about the 8 pallets and the 2 trucks that had been stopped before they reached their unloading bays, and the 3rd truck that had already arrived at a hospital in Baltimore where the medication had not yet been opened. He thought about all the people the story had passed through before it reached this room, this map, this daughter. "Yes," he said finally, "that was me and a lot of other people who helped." On a small table beneath the map, there was a bound book, 40 pages, 1 page from each hospital. Sophie opened it and turned the pages slowly, the way she read everything, 1 word at a time. She reached the last page. It was signed by a cardiac nurse in a hospital in Philadelphia. It read, "Your father remembered there was a patient at the end of every shipment." Sophie read that sentence twice.
Then she reached into the chest pocket of her father's blazer and she pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges now, softer than it had been a month ago. She unfolded it and looked at the crayon truck and the 4 words above it, the same 4 words she had written in careful 9-year-old handwriting the day before her father had gone into the warehouse for what he had thought was an ordinary Tuesday night shift. Bring everyone home safe. She walked to the wall beside the map. She found a small clear space between 2 framed documents, and with a piece of tape a staff member handed her without a word, she fixed her drawing to the wall of the Patient Safety Center that carried her mother's name. Then she turned back to her father and she asked him one more question. "Did Mom know you would do this?" Lucas looked at the map. He looked at the drawing. He looked at his daughter. "Your mother," he said, "taught me that sometimes doing right means standing still when everyone else is telling you to keep moving." He stood up. He took Sophie's hand. Behind them, through a window into the receiving bay, a forklift moved slowly across the floor with a fresh pallet of medication, and a young receiver in a navy shirt knelt beside it with a scanner in his hand, checking the boxes one by one. The trucks were still leaving the warehouse. The system was still running, but every worker on that floor now carried the authority to stop it, and every scan they made was recorded in a place no single account could erase. The phone call that protected 40 hospitals lasted 3 minutes and 37 seconds, but what truly protected those hospitals was not inside the call. It was inside the 6 years a man had spent checking details the people with bigger titles had told him were not worth looking at. It was inside a 9-year-old girl's question at a kitchen counter about whether the medicine in a box was real. It was inside a wife's decision in the last months of her life to write a clause that trusted the worker at the bottom of the system more than the executive at the top. And it was inside the moment a manager leaned across a conference table and told a single father that he had no power, and shown him, without meaning to, exactly what that power was for. Lucas and Sophie walked out of the room together. He did not close the door behind them. He left it open because the room was no longer his. It belonged to everyone who would come after.